Good afternoon. Most strokes are caused as a multifactorial process and because of multiple risk factors, chief amongst which are hypertension, diabetes, dyslipidemia, heart disease, smoking, and you know those. But there is emerging evidence that there is a whole lot of non-conventional risk factors which may also be as a cause of stroke occurrence. And this knowledge is important because it will add to our armamentarium for stroke prevention. And one of these is obstructive sleep apnea. In fact, the role of sleep apnea disorders in circulatory, regulatory, as a dysregulatory mechanisms and vascular injury is an emerging concept. It's a developing concept. There are a lot of physiological functions which go altered when there is a problem in our sleep-wake cycle, because these functions are there in the circulatory system, they are altered by the circadian rhythm with far-reaching ramifications because they occur in a chain-like reaction. Some of them are listed here, which include endocrine secretions, thermoregulations, renal functions, respiratory control, heart rhythm, hematologic parameters, immune system, drug metabolism, and a lot of it has already been discussed extensively and wonderfully in the previous lectures. So for stroke, let's focus on few small things. There is increase in plus catecholamine levels somewhere between 4 to 6 in the morning till 1 noon. There's decrease in the fibrinolytic activity, increased platelet aggregability. That's why you have what are called as wake-up strokes. In fact, 25% of all acute ischemic events are known to happen when patient is waking up. So also we do have heart attacks. So there's a lot of cardiovascular morbidity and strokes which are happening when a person is waking up. And these are probably some of the reasons which have been implicated. I'm skipping a lot of slides because this already been covered. We know that there's a huge prevalence of obstructive sleep apnea. In fact, they say it's 20% of the population is 1 in 5. And we are unique in the present circumstance that we are aging. So we have a lot of aging population and we are also growing in our waistlines. Therefore, both ways, I think we are going to see more and more sleep apnea problems in the coming few years. And snoring, I'm not going to get into that also. Just to recap that a snore is that loud vibratory sound which is a respiratory effort in a sleeping individual. So as regards snoring and the sleep disordered breathing, again we have been extensively been taught, so no more of that recap. But there is a lot of evidence which is linking the sleep disorder breathing with cardiovascular morbidity, cerebrovascular accidents, and we are dealing with stroke. One point in snoring, there is one literature which has said, some it is not extensive, but a little bit of it which said that in fact with this vibratory noise, there are these atherosclerotic plaques in the carotid artery system which also get dislodged. I don't know what evidence we do have, but we do have some evidence of CIMT, that is carotid intima media thickness. I'll come to it a little later. So there's a circumstantial evidence which points to a causal association with sleep disorder breathing, the rubric under which we're talking of mainly obstructive sleep apnea and stroke. The study from Japan where they looked into these patients with OSA, and after controlling with these confounding variables, which are very many, lot of vascular risk factors, and they did find that the carotid intima media thickness, that's a little kind of a biomarker which is correlated with vascular outcomes. So we have had statin study on CIMT, we've had the studies with certain antihypertensives like ACE inhibitors with CIMT. Similarly, they looked at CPAP and looked at CIMT thickness and they found that it decreased. So there's a little bit of evidence which is in favor of that. Again, I'm skipping this too, and also these diagrammatic, sorry, because there's been an overlap, so I don't want to waste time on what you've already been taught. Now, besides the OSA being so very prevalent in the general population, we also know that the commonest sleep disorder breathing which happens in a patient with a stroke is also OSA. So the prevalence of a sleep disordered problem and the sleep problems in general in stroke are humongous, and they vary from 50 to 70%. That's almost 3/4 of patients with stroke have some sleep related issue. In fact, OSA is known to predate a stroke, happen with stroke, and continue to exist after stroke. This measurement, again, I'm skipping. Also, the symptoms and signs you all know very well. Now, the untreated OSA, we've seen the morbidity associated with it, and there is a huge spectrum. Now, why is OSA related to stroke? Now, there are shared risk factors, and you know that age is the biggest risk factor. We have this metabolic syndrome, we have hypertension which is increasing. It's now said that almost 1 in 3 of adults are hypertensives, 1 in 5 are diabetics, and we have this 1 in 5 who have OSA. So it's just that there is so much of prevalence of these things happening. So they may be there in the same person. And plus the shared risk factors, we've heard so much of pathophysiological issues which are linking up these. So we do have hypertension, we have insulin resistance, we have coronary artery disease, we have these complex arrhythmias which are raised almost 2 to 3-fold, and we have atrial fibrillation is known almost to enhance 4-fold in patients with OSA, recalcitrant arrhythmias which are not really responsive to management unless OSA is treated. This is all emerging evidence, and each one of them is linked to the occurrence of stroke. All of them can cause stroke. So you have shared risk factors. Apart from this, we also have some evidence on imaging. So if you take an MRI scan and you look at white matter changes, now they have not had overt clinical strokes, but the covert ischemia which is going on in the brain. They do have leukoariosis, which are called as white matter changes, which are around the ventricles, and they're graded by Fazekas grading system, and anything which is graded above 2 and 3 have been linked with a little bit of cognitive decline as well as a vascular cognitive, what we call as VCI, vascular cognitive impairment. Besides which, they've also seen, they've taken patients with Alzheimer's, and they have taken age-matched controls, and they've seen that patients with Alzheimer's also have increased prevalence of the sleep apnea disorder, so also vascular. So you do have evidence of cognitive decline, and we'll come to that a little later. There are independent risk factors which are apart from the shared risk factors which can correlate the occurrence of these cerebrovascular incidents with OSA, and that's again, this is a recap again we have talked about earlier in the forenoon. We have sympathetic activation, probably linking to tachyarrhythmias. We have blood pressure fluctuation. You know that after an apnea, there's a surge in heart rate and a surge in blood pressure, and it's happening repetitively every night, every time the person is sleeping in the night. So that's causing impaired cerebral hemodynamics. Hypoxemia associated enhanced inflammation and oxidative stress. This again you've seen. Systemic inflammation due to activated nuclear factors, kappa B mediated inflammatory pathways. There is thrombophilic situation because there's thrombosis happening, and you know inflammation is linked to the production of atherosclerosis now, so there is accelerated atherosclerotic process, increased plasma fibrinogen levels, increased platelet reactivity. They've also seen that enhanced right to left shunting through patent foramen ovale. So these may be independently happening, and there are shared risk factors. I'm not getting into this complex diagram. Again, this has been projected before. It's intensely very, very complex that you have parallel as well as things which are linked to each other which may enhance, resulting in a cerebrovascular activity. And then we have hypertension. This has been dealt with, that why do we have hypertension associated with OSA? There have been 2 studies which have been quoted here. They've been dealt with before, which do say that the relative risk of hypertension in patients with severe OSA definitely is greater for the occurrence of hypertension. And some evidence that with CPAP you can at least decrease the hypertension which is remaining uncontrolled. And a lot of mechanisms which has also been dealt with by Dr. Goswami in his lecture on endocrine system. Now there are apnea responses which can have, there are these cardiac responses which have been seen, decreased stroke volume, decreased heart rate, decreased cardiac output. Again, cardiac arrhythmia, oxygen. This is just repetitive, that we have a whole lot of complex cardiovascular mechanisms which are all going haywire when there is a severe OSA. And REM phase seems to be the most vulnerable when this is happening, because REM sleep-related atonia, because the tone of the muscles goes down in REM, the dilator oropharyngeal muscles and the loss of respiratory drive. So whatever is happening will be enhanced, in the sense the degree of and the prolongation of the episode of obstruction happens in REM sleep. So there's more profound hypoxemia, and therefore there is further risk happening for these events. And is there evidence that something silently is happening while we sleep? Yes. So when a patient does have these kind of sleep disorders, with the sleep disorder breathing, there could be evidence that there is transient ischemic attacks happening during the night. And this has been documented by the fact that, one, on neuroimaging techniques, we've been able to document that the extent of white matter changes and silent ischemic episodes do happen. Second is, by ultrasound technique, they've looked at the cerebral hemodynamic flow. So transcranial Doppler studies on patients who have OSA. So nocturnal studies have seen that whenever there is apnea, there's a decrease in cerebral blood flow through the middle cerebral artery, which is documented on an MCA, on transcranial Doppler. Now, look at this happening in a person who has a severe carotid artery stenosis. You already have a compromised circulation. On top of that, during apnea, every time there's a further decrease. And so this is tilting the balance. So there is recurrent cerebral hypoperfusion syndrome, and that is known for both vascular cognitive impairment as well as causing this silent ischemic episodes in the brain. And that is like a tip of the iceberg and is a ticking bomb. So sometimes whenever there is a drop which is, it tips to the point where you can have a big ischemic episode, the person lands up with a wake-up stroke. There was a study conducted in Yale Medical Center. There were around 1,000 odd participants, and again, when they were all adjusted for all the confounding variables which are known to be vascular risk factors for the occurrence of a cerebrovascular disease, and they saw that patients who had an OSA had 22 strokes on follow-up with 50 deaths, whereas those who did not have an OSA had 2 strokes. And this is just what the last, in fact, has already been alluded to. Professor Vijayan very elegantly told you about these studies, but these are the different studies which are population-based, clinic-based, community-based studies which have linked on follow-up longitudinally as well as a case control, as cohort studies where they have found that there is some kind of a linkage which you cannot ignore, the occurrence of OSA and the presence of OSA in stroke, as well as the occurrence of stroke in those patients who have OSA when they have followed up. So there is burgeoning literature, as has been said again by Dr. Vijayan. Some of them have not been correlated, they have been negative. So there's no level 1 evidence to say, yes, this is a risk factor, but it is an emerging evidence, and we are certainly somewhere. Now let's come down to what happens during an acute phase. In an acute ischemic event, the first thing which happens is that there's an inversion of sleep-wake rhythm. So we sleep in the night, we are waking up in the day. So these people with strokes, they are agitated during the night and they're lethargic in their sleep during the day. So the inversion of sleep-wake cycle is what happens in an acute event. In fact, as a biomarker of a good stroke outcome, you look for the sleep-wake cycle. If they have preservation of an REM sleep phase, normally, and you have the normal sleep-wake cycles which are preserved after an acute event, those guys do well after a stroke as compared to those who have a disrupted sleep rhythm. And also, where is the stroke happening? Is it happening in thalamus, in the midbrain, in the hemisphere, and how large is it? It's a small stroke, it's a lacune, it's just there in the internal capsule, or is it a whole hemisphere which is gone, will also determine what kind of an alteration the sleep cycle you have. Now there are these neuronal centers for sleep, which is the pontomedullary junction. Predominantly in the tegmentum, we have the pharyngeal motility, which is essentially the pons is the center for REM sleep. A lot of sleep functions are regulated there, therefore the brainstem strokes are bad. They would have some amount of sleep disturbance. And one classic example is a lateral medullary syndrome, wherein you will have sleep disorder breathing which simulates that of obstructive sleep apnea. But then if you do have, say, thalamus which is involved, or you have a midbrain which is involved, where is the reticular activating system? That is there in the midbrain. So if you have a stroke happening there, there's damage there, you don't have to implicate an obstructive sleep apnea. As such, people would become hypersomnolent. So the sleep disorders will be different. So the major sleep disorders associated with stroke, this is where it is enlisted. They can be insomnia, and also because of a lot of medical conditions. You have the, as I said, OSA is the commonest sleep disorder breathing which happens with an acute event. You could have hypersomnia as a result of central origin. Say, for example, you have implication of an diencephalic stroke or a mesencephalic stroke. You can have because of a disrupted nocturnal sleep, again, medical conditions, because of the medications which are being given. There could be what is called as a circadian rhythm sleep disorders, and a whole lot of parasomnias, which includes RLS, which include PLMS, and most important would be REM behavior disorders, which are what is a fascinating behavioral disorders which you can encounter, and it is so fascinating when you see so much can happen while you sleep. So this REM behavior disorder is a dream enacting behavior where they become very aggressive, and this is also seen in patients in acute ischemic stroke, plus sleep-related movement disorders such as restless leg syndrome and PLMS. Perhaps we can discuss this further in the interactive session or if the time permits. The other patterns of respiratory dysfunction include apneusis, which is apnea during sustained inspiration. There could be non-obstructive apnea, mixed apneas, and there's something called Ondine's curse. The person forgets to breathe when he sleeps. And this isn't Greek mythology, it actually happens. Very recently we had a patient in the ward on a third stroke. He actually would be ventilator dependent only in the nights, because while he's awake, he's okay. The moment he sleeps, his saturation plummets to 60 to 65%. And we had to actually give him a respiratory stimulant to get him off the ventilator. This happens. This is Ondine's curse. And of course, you have in huge hemispheric infarction, there could be decreased REM sleep. And students of physiology, you would know the Cheyne-Stokes breathing. When you have huge hemispheric infarcts, there would be Cheyne-Stokes respiration. There's a whole lot of respiratory disorders or breathing disorders which you can encounter in clinical practice. So someone who's apneustic and then develops Cheyne-Stokes, that patient is actually improving because he's going from brainstem up to the hemisphere. But someone who's breathing normally, and the next day you find that he's developed the Cheyne-Stokes breathing, that means there's something wrong. He's actually deteriorating. So it would prognosticate as to what is happening to this patient. In acute stroke, as I said before, it's extremely prevalent, and it is seen that it is more common in men with an acute stroke as compared to women, and also when there are multiple strokes as compared to a single stroke, and depends upon the extent of stroke. There is some literature which said that cardioembolic may have less incidence, but I think it's more of a statistical gimmick. We need more information to comment on that. And does it actually also implicate the stroke prognosis? What about the outcome of a patient or stroke patient who has this sleep problems? They have reduced motivation, there's decreased cognition, so they don't understand that they have to rehabilitate, they have to do these exercise programs. You need compliance with this, and they continue to sleep. They don't get into an exercise program, obviously they're not going to do well. And most important is, we've talked about the cerebral hypoperfusion. So if you have an OSA or you have any sleep disorder problem there, and there is decreased perfusion to the brain further on an ischemic event, now whatever is this critically perfused, jeopardized cerebral tissue, what we call as ischemic penumbra, will become infarcted. So dying brain will become dead because there is further decrease in the perfusion. That's a risk, plus also increased chance of a recurrence of an ischemic event. Therefore, OSA is a predictor of poor outcome after stroke because there's increased dependency, increased mortality, impaired cognition, and concentration. And these are the known mechanisms as to why it is also a parameter for stroke outcome. Diagnosis, we've already talked about the various mechanisms, but in a stroke patient is going to be a lot of logistic issues, has to conduct a PSG because that's a critical care thing, and you have so many gadgets already there, and they have to be compliant to have that, even the PSG done. Just like in children, it's going to be a Herculean task to get a polysomnogram in a patient with an acute stroke. So most of the studies have done when they've stabilized. They've also used portable devices, there's a SATS trial which have used that. So again, we don't have a level 1 evidence to say we can use it, but there is increasing literature which is coming on it. So the treatment of OSA after stroke, again with CPAP, and it is said that it will help in a whole lot of morbidity issues associated with it. And there is some evidence that the randomized control trials of CPAP in acute ischemic strokes did improve in the stroke scales, that is activities, and also helped in depression, in motor recovery and sleepiness. But then there are limitations. We have no clear guidelines as to when do we do these, even the studies, and when do we institute the management in the form of a CPAP. And of course, as I said, we have problems with compliance. Lifestyle changes, the CPAP bilevels, I'm not going into that, but there's been one study. There was a study where they did the CPAP management and seen that this is a follow-up. Those patients who had severe, I can't see much from here, the apnea-hypopnea index, which was severe, and those patients who had CPAP and those who couldn't tolerate CPAP. And if we see that those who couldn't tolerate CPAP rapidly deteriorated compared to those who could tolerate, and they were comparable to those who had a very mild or no OSA. So the use of CPAP in stroke risk, successful treatment will lower blood pressure, improve blood flow, therefore probably will reduce mortality, especially after stroke. And again, coming back to the same slide, there have been further management issues besides OSA. People have tried parasomnias, that is REM behavior disorders with benzodiazepines like clonazepam, and the sleep-related movement disorders like RLS and PLMS. Now, these are not just related to sleep per se. They may occur as parasomnias, and we may discuss them further if we have time. These are very interesting sleep phenomena, and you'll be amazed as to how common this is. Restless leg syndrome especially. Now, you have this feeling of something which is, there is this feeling that you should move the legs. And you have this, the older parents and grandparents who would have this pair dabaw when they sleep. This actually is RLS. Essentially, it's a feeling that you have to move, this restlessness. It isn't that there is pain, essentially, it's an abnormal sensation which keeps you awake. And this has been correlated with a whole lot of things, with serum ferritin, with anemia, and so on and so forth. But there is increasing evidence that this is extremely common. And it can also impair sleep, and whatever impairs sleep, then that's going to have a problem in your quality of life subsequently. Similarly, PLMS, and as I said, we can discuss if we have time further. So the conclusions, therefore, is that sleep apnea is a risk factor for stroke. It's probably the evidence is growing stronger, and prevalence among stroke survivors is particularly high. It's unappreciated still, but how aggressive is to pursue in an acute ischemic stroke, the presence of an OSA, when do we start the investigative process, is the evidence is being gathered. And all of the current studies do implicate that you must treat these patients with CPAP. We need further literature to actually tell us when and how to treat them. Thank you.
Again, one of the most outstanding